Well, welcome. My name's David, and I've recently been appointed a Professor of Economics here at the Macquarie Business School after a 30-year career working in policy institutions such as the Department of the Prime Minister and Cabinet, the International Monetary Fund, and the Reserve Bank of Australia. But we're not really here today to talk about me. We're here today to talk about you, and in particular, to talk about your future. Now, I can already hear you say, David, what can you say about my future? First of all, I've never met you folks. Well, that's true. Secondly, you say, no one knows the future. Well, that's not true. You know, we know a lot about the future already, at least the economic future. We already know that we're going to be in a country that is aging, which is going to change the kind of mix of the things that we need to produce and make sure that we're really using our youth, that's you, in a way that's going to set ourselves up best for that kind of an environment. We know that there's going to be lots of technological change, which is generally moving towards favouring people who are skilled, who have the kind of capabilities, the social skills and so forth, as more machinery comes in to replace jobs that can just be automated, so where there won't be a large future for people in those areas. We know that we're going to be a much more integrated society with the rest of the world. As the middle class grows in Asia, in particular, both China and in India, that's going to change again the kind of mix of opportunities that we have. How do we adjust to that? How do we make sure that we're doing the things that we're really particularly good at and have those other countries do the things that they're particularly good at? And what about those long-term issues like climate change and energy policies? How do we deal with those kind of things to make sure that we manage those kind of risks and at the same time keep society in an inclusive manner so that everybody feels they have a fair go? Well, that's the kind of future that we already know, but as I've just indicated to you, there are lots of questions around that future. How do we make the choices that we have today to be able to set ourselves up for a successful interaction with that kind of a known future? Well, welcome to the world of economics. That's in a nutshell what economics is all about. How do we make choices today within the limited resources that we have? Remember, Star Trek aside, there's still only 24 hours in a day. And we want to use that 24 hours to make the things that add to our consumption while taking the leisure to do the other sort of activities we want to do in our lives. So how do we make choices today that can most efficiently use that limited amount of time and the limited other inputs like machinery that we have as well? And as we're making those choices, how do we make sure that we're also setting down the kind of markers so that we'll continue to have good, robust, sustainable economic growth, and we can make even better choices in the future as well? Well, that's what economics teaches you. Economics is a set of tools, models, capabilities that strengthen in a robust framework how we as a society can go about making choices that will lead to a bright future. And that's what I want to sort of stress to you about why I think economics is such a critical part of the frame, and one of the things that I think you should think very carefully about when you're starting to think up on your career choice. Let's take one of those tools. Take, say, cost benefit. You may not realize it, but you're using the cost benefit framework all the time. What did you do last Saturday night? Maybe you went out for a meal with some friends. Why didn't you study at that time? Why didn't you watch a Netflix movie at that time? Why didn't you just hang out with your pet at home and do nothing much in particular? And whatever you did last Saturday night, what are you going to do next Saturday night? Well, the kind of thinking that you're doing as you make these kind of decisions, which you make every day, is all about thinking about, well, what's the benefit to me of doing that thing relative to the cost? And the cost is what you can't do in the same time. You can only go and do one thing on a Saturday night. Now, that sounds a bit crazy to say that all these decisions I just do, and they're actually underpinned by a framework, but they are. Think about the choices you're making today. What university course am I going to do? Well, you're not just going to randomly choose some course. You're going to think about, well, what am I interested in doing? What's the future going to be like if I do that course? What kind of skills am I going to get that's going to set me up for an interesting career? Cost benefit. And we make these choices as society all the time, both at the government level, the corporate level, as well as a community level. And that's just one of the many tools that economists focus on, will teach at university, and then economists within their working career can utilize over the balance of their time. Now that's a general tool. There are lots of specialist careers in economics, and you've probably heard of many of them before as well. Macroeconomists are the folks that are trying to think about how do we make sure that we have a good, robust economic growth, while at the same time making sure that the amount of spending we do on all of the goods and services we produce, that they grow roughly in line. We don't want too much spending, that's inflation, but we don't want too little either, that's unemployment. That's what macroeconomists, folks that work in the Reserve Bank of Australia or Australian Treasury, they're looking at those kinds of issues. International economists are looking at trade and poverty alleviation, which is a really important aspect of making sure that our world progresses. And by the way, we're doing okay on the poverty alleviation front. Economists who work in those areas are in places like the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and other organizations that are trying to think about how to promote a better integration in the world. Companies really rely on economists. They need to think about how do they set up their investment today for an uncertain future. How do they think about the sorts of things they could do, but then choose the things that they think they should do within that kind of a framework? And by the way, how do they also keep their costs contained? Because after all, they're trying to maximize profits. So organizations that employ economists to do those sort of things are either the companies themselves, although they tend to be the big companies, or things like consulting companies, PricewaterhouseCoopers, KPMG, those sorts of aspects as well. Finance markets, big demand for economists. If you're in the business of finance, you're trying to think about, I've got the savings coming in from the population, how do I best use those savings to lend to some people where the risk is contained and the return is likely to be really strong? And taking risks for an uncertain future is of course a pretty challenging area. So lots of banks and other financial entities employ economists to help make those kind of decisions. Well, the private market doesn't always make the best decisions. Sometimes the incentives are not really aligned well with society's goals as well. So it's really important to have good, strong regulation. And there's lots of regulatory agencies that employ economists to try and think about how do we use the price system in a way that betters society overall and not just for one particular company from there. So the ACCC, ASIC, a whole bunch of other regulatory agencies are looking at those sorts of issues from there. But it's not, and then there's the whole crowd of people that specialize in other areas of our economy, things like health economists, labor economists, environmental economists, and so cultural economists, all sorts of different areas. In fact, you kind of name it. I'll bet you there's an economic specialty which looks into that kind of an area and tries to take the economic tools and apply them in a way that can make good decisions today whilst also setting the parameters up for that future, which I've mentioned several times today. Finally, what about communication? That's a really important part as well. The journalists, the policy commentators, the academics, who are all trying to take knowledge and provide it to people so that they can better understand our world and the choices that we have within it. Well, I've given you a little bit of a hint about the kind of careers that economists do, what economics is about, and the ways that you can take it both in a general sense as well as into very specific skills. But the most important message that I want to leave you today is that your job, your role as a young person thinking through what your career is going to be, is to work out what are you really interested in working within. What kind of issues really kind of light your passion, and you think, yeah, this is something that I'm not just going to want to learn about today, but I'm going to want to continue to come back to and learn over what's likely to be a 40-year career? Well, if the answer to that question is, I really care about making sure that our society progresses, I really care about that poverty is eliminated over my lifetime, that I really care about making sure that we're making decisions today which bring inclusiveness of all society, where we seek the win-win rather than the win-lose, then I'd strongly encourage you to think about economics as a way to go. Not just in your first career here, which Macquarie can provide you, but also potentially in other studies later on, where we have some master's programs that are pretty attractive in bringing in that theory as well as the applied focus from there. So if that lights your passion, if that's what you want to do, then think carefully about whether or not economics is indeed your choice for career. And I hope to see you around campus. So, with that as a long preamble, I'm happy now to take some questions from you, and who would like to be first?
Hey everyone, welcome back to Macquarie University Open Day Streamed. Thank you so much for tuning in wherever you may be, your lounge room, dining room, table, kitchen, or your bedroom, wherever you are. We really appreciate your presence here and getting involved. So thank you for all of those of you at home involved in today's session. Now, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Sienna. I'm in my final year of a Bachelor of Commerce, majoring in Decision Science. And I've also got a Master in Management lined up because I'm not going anywhere just yet. Now, for today's session on Careers in Economics, I'm joined by Professor David Osmond. Thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
Absolutely fabulous. Now, for those of you at home, I can see you're definitely using the Q&A function, so that's absolutely fabulous, but I also encourage you to actually use the live chat function as well. It's the bottom left-hand corner of your screen, okay? And it's being manned by experts, so I guarantee your questions will be answered to the best of our capabilities as soon as we can get those answers to you. But for now, let me introduce Professor Osmond to you, okay? So he's a Professor of Economics here at the Macquarie University Business School. He's previously worked at the Reserve Bank of Australia, holding senior positions in the Financial Stability and Economic Analysis departments. He's also worked on economic stabilisation and technical assistance issues across numerous countries for the International Monetary Fund, and I think we will actually come back to that because I think it's quite an interesting thing that you've got that I'd love to know more about that.
Sure.
And also, he's written on a range of topics, including regulatory policies in the financial sector, global imbalances, the mining sector, or China's economy, for example. So without further ado, let's get into some questions.
Let's
go. How about that? Okay. The first question I wanted to ask you, what skills and abilities does a student need to be successful when going into the economical workforce?
Wow, that's a very big question, Sienna. First of all, let me just join, like everyone else, to all of the students out there who are thinking about their careers, wondering, look, what's the best path for me to go? What guidance can I get, and so forth? And you're doing absolutely the right thing. It's, you know, everyone has a different view on what's the best path to go, what the future's going to be, what are the best careers to do forth, and so on. It's really important to get a wide range of perspectives on that, particularly if you're not quite sure what kind of a career you're going to go into.
Absolutely.
And so that's really what the purpose of today is, to give you a bit of a taste and a feel about multiple careers so that you're in a good position to be able to make those sorts of choices.
Absolutely.
Okay, look, let me get to the specific question of what are the skills and abilities of the future, essentially, which is what you're getting at right now. Well, guess what? No one knows. But we can know where we've been and where we're likely to continue to go.
Okay.
So those of you who listened to my initial talk will have heard me say that, look, actually, although people like to think we know nothing about the future, you hear that all the time as a throwaway line, in fact, we know quite a bit about the future and the sorts of perspective that we're going to be looking at. So in the technology space, you know, we know clearly that the machines are going to increasingly replace work that is very easy to be able to do by a machine, things that can be automated, where you do one step, then the next step, then the next step, and the next step. And the machines are becoming pretty clever. I mean, they're almost got right to be able to drive a car. Because you think about driving a car, yeah, it is a bit kind of crazy, but if you think about driving a car, it is just a set of steps which you do over and over again. Yes, with variety, depending on what occurs, but nonetheless they're the same kind of steps as you go to the turn to the left or turn to the right or so forth from there. So these are things that are going to continue to go on as our machines become essentially better and better at doing things that are standardized. But what the machines are never going to be able to do is to think. They're never going to be able to work out what is the appropriate trade-off when there's lots of complexity and where you can't really know what is the best way forward because the future's going to be unknown. The machines are never going to be good at the social interactions,
Of course.
building trust, and so forth. So these are the kinds of things that people are going to have to be really good at. They're going to have to be able in the future, at least the people that are going to be the most resilient in the future careers, are going to be the ones that bring this degree of understanding how to approach a complex problem and being able to break that problem down into its components, but being able to see it within a unified framework. In my introductory comments that were recorded, I spoke about this importance of whatever your studies are, whether they be economics or in business or something completely different in engineering or so on, of having a rigorous way of approaching an issue, being able to take the broad and uncertain parts of that issue and put it within that framework, and then being able to evaluate what is the best way forward. They're going to be the skills of the future. Now, in addition, the ability to interact well with people, to create harmony, to have a sense of inclusiveness, is a way of fostering a set of ideas from everyone, such that the final solution is bigger than just the sum of the parts. You've got all of the different perspectives and put it together. Machines are not going to do that either.
Yeah, absolutely. And
So-
taking the strength of each individual to get the best outcome.
And that's exactly right. That's exactly right. So, you know, humans are not complex machines.
No.
And that's why complex machines will never be humans. So the challenge in careers as we go through society is to be thinking very much about, well, what are the aspects that are not algorithmic? What are not just straight A follows B follows C follows D? And actually make sure that you build up a set of both tools and a framework with the social interactions. I can't know exactly what careers that are going to be, where the technology is going to be, what the new items that we're going to be using as regular consumption items.
Exactly.
Remember, the iPhone was only created 10 years ago.
And everyone's got a new one every year.
And everyone's now got a new one, and we think it's ubiquitous. In fact, most people watching this video will never know any world except with an iPhone around.
It's true.
But, you know, when I did my computer science degree, I did a major in computer science at university, and I was using punch cards as my
don't even know
major.
what that is.
So, yeah, many of you won't even know what that is. But, I was pretty good at punch cards, by the way, too. That skill kind of didn't help me much. But my point is to show that we can't predict exactly where things are going to go, but we can predict the kind of an approach of what are going to be the successful ways of interacting within that uncertainty.
Absolutely.
And that's a long way of answering the question.
No, I think that's perfect. And I think also the ability to interact well with other humans and to have the confidence and to gain the trust and to build a community network, that's invaluable no matter what discipline you're in.
That's
so
exactly right.
let's say you start in another discipline and you're coming over to economics. Not only is it going to help you once you're in economics, it's going to build a bridge between the two. So invaluable skills.
Well, we like to think so.
No,
we like to think
I
that
absolutely
economics
agree.
can be applied across a broad range of questions. Again, in the introductory video, I was saying to you, what did you do last Saturday night? Now, most people would not think that that was an economic question, but it really is.
I didn't know that.
Because it's a cost-benefit approach. Because once you've done one thing on a Saturday night, you can't do something else on the same Saturday night. So you have to make a choice. And all of life is about making choices under constraints. Because there's only 24 hours in a day, and because we want leisure and a set of consumption goods within that, and interact with our friends and all the rest of the stuff along the way, and build a community that's inclusive of everyone such that all boats are lifted rather than just some of them. We have to make choices and make sure we steer ourselves towards that. That's the beauty of the economic framework, because it discusses those things again and again from multiple different directions, which is what I believe makes the career so exciting.
Absolutely. Well, you've gotten me excited. I don't even do economics. So thank you for that. You were talking about how we don't know what the future holds and how it is ever changing. And I think at the moment, especially given the circumstances of COVID, circumstances, we have no idea where things are going to be in a month, let alone 5 years down the track. But can you just touch on how COVID has affected the economics industry, and if there's anything that we can really do to, I guess, manage those changes?
Oh, Sienna, you like asking big questions.
Well, we want the good answers. The students on the other line of that camera, they want it all answered.
That's not a quick soundbite. But let me try to give you as quick a soundbite as possible and link it into the students that are thinking about their careers, because that's obviously the most important aspect right now. The COVID-19 shock is obviously a big health shock, and they're still trying to grapple with that one. But it's a very large economic shock as well. In fact, this is a much larger economic shock than the global financial crisis, which we all thought was exceptional. And that was 10 years ago.
Absolutely.
Now we're slowly coming out of that and rebuilding the confidence and getting things reopened and so forth from there, which is bringing and lifting our economy. But the reality is that unemployment is very high as well. Unemployment somewhere around about 10% or so. Youth unemployment is probably double that. And when I mean youth, I mean people aged between 15 and 24, all of you on this call. University students. And the reality is that it's going to take a long time to work off that high levels of unemployment. And as companies try to work out how they're going to manage this very challenging economic environment, they too are going to be looking to think, well, who can best contribute towards managing the problems and the challenges? That again comes back to say that from a youth point of view, you want to try to skill up as much as you can. You want to try to master this framework that I'm talking about, being able to bring a perspective which is robust and which can therefore add to other perspectives and other ways that companies and indeed public agencies are trying to think about problems. So now is a really important time to be thinking carefully about what am I going to be, what education am I going to be taking on? And how am I going to make sure that at the end of that period, whether it's 3 years or 4 years, or you go on to another study later or whatever, make sure that you have something which is really robust and different from those that have not had the same sort of situation, that you're bringing something new and fresh to the table.
Increase employability chances.
And that increases your employability. And that's exactly it's right. And, the COVID-19, that's always been the case. That's what you should always be doing as a young person.
But even more so now.
But even more so now, when we're in this especially difficult and challenging economic environment.
Absolutely. No, I know that was a tough question, but I think within economics, it's a really important question to be asking. So you've summed it up beautifully. So thank you for that. Now, I do actually just want to go back to the work you did with the International Monetary Fund. Now, it says here you've worked in numerous countries. Can you tell me a bit about what you did, how you came into that role, and what you've gotten out of it?
Oh boy, another tough question.
I thought I was doing better this time.
Yeah, look, I was with the IMF for around about 15 years or so, and with the Reserve Bank for about 15 years as well. But before that, I was working in the Prime Minister's department down in Canberra. And so I knew I wanted to join the IMF from a very young age. I was kind of, I wanted to go and save the world and that sort of thing. And that's the wonderful thing of youth, the enthusiasm that all of you have to want to get out there, solve the world's problems and whatever. That's just fabulous. I wish we could bottle it and then keep it there. Because, this is not quite answering your question, but the reality is that, all of you watching this video have an incredible future ahead of you. The world has all sorts of challenges around it, the COVID-19 and inequality and climate change and whatever. But there's also an incredible amount of technological progress. Think about the medical advances we're making, how we've almost eliminated poverty around the world. People don't even know that we've done that in the last few decades. How we are integrating ideas and people from all over the world, how we're changing the way we're communicating. These are all fabulous things which already exist. Who knows where they're going to go on from here? And that's why the generation watching this video have an incredibly bright future ahead of you, with challenges to manage that as collectively you'll have to do, but with an incredible excitement to be able to start from that favourable position. Now, that's not quite an answer to your question, but
valuable information nonetheless.
But nonetheless, information nonetheless. Well, so I was like that, and I really wanted to join the IMF. I wanted to get out there and go into countries and see if you could affect these huge, big questions. And broadly speaking, that's what I and a bunch of other people, managed to do, because that's what the youth takes over the next generation, and they solve and bring up the next issues. In my case, I joined the IMF just before the former Soviet Union imploded. That's the, what we like to call Russia, but of course it was a large number of provinces. And the issue was, how do you turn this space that was under a communist area into a more market-based, incentive-based kind of approach to get economic growth going, to get more stability going, to better manage their carbon emissions. They were terrible in those days. And so I was part of that effort, particularly focused on Ukraine. I actually went to live in Ukraine for several years with the IMF to actually work on a daily basis, trying to think about, well, what comes next? And something I really learned, and this is a general issue across all of the countries that I worked in. Which other ones were? I was in Turkmenistan, Sweden, South Africa during the change from apartheid rules, Kenya, Poland, the Pacific Islands, Malaysia, China, Bangladesh, all of these sort of countries.
Stop showing off now. Okay, I get it.
But you get the point. Okay, the point with all of these issues was to come in and recognize that, look, I can see 100 things that need to be done. 100 problems that are around. You can think about 100 problems in our economy as well, if you like. But the challenge is to say, yes, but we can't do 100 things today and tomorrow. We need to choose maybe 3. Not 33, but 3.
One thing at a time.
One thing at a time. The things that are really going to matter. And what you want to choose in those 3 are what are going to be the things that add the best bang for your buck. In other words, which are the ones that are really going to be pushing an economy towards progress, economic growth, while ensuring you sustain inclusiveness amongst the majority of the population. And to do that, to come up with, for each of those countries I mentioned, the 3 or 4 things that are really going to matter. Outline what do you really mean within those 3, what are the policies, what is the government going to do, how are we going to get the right support, and stay focused for several years on just those 3.
Those 3 problems.
Is a real challenge to do. But if you've chosen the right 3,
it'll make
you're going to get
difference.
the monumental difference from there. And that process, choosing that 3, it comes back to, what do you need to be able to choose those 3? A rigorous framework within which you take all those 100 questions, put it in, and see which one is likely to be the ones that are going to give you the biggest bang for your buck on the other side. And in all the countries that I went to, that was essentially the process that we were trying to do from there. And, sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. Sometimes you'd say to the governments, these are the 3 or 4 things, and they'd say, well, no, they're all just politically too hard, or we don't want to do them, or whatever. Okay, fine, that's sometimes you got to walk away and say, hey, I'm just a bureaucrat. But ultimately, that's where society makes progress, when it works out what are the few things it really needs to do well, and stays diligently focused on those and doesn't get distracted outside of that aspect.
Well, your enthusiasm absolutely shines through. I mean, for someone who doesn't...
It's a wonderful profession. It's a great profession. It can go in so many places.
Thank you so much for your time, Professor. And thank you so much for all of those at home tuning in. I hope you have learned something. I have learned something. I've been invigorated with your passion. So thank you so much for being on board today. Now, coming up next, we have a Bachelor of Business Analytics session at 2 p.m. So hopefully I see some of you there. In the meantime, you've got the live chat function, bottom left-hand corner, like I said, but also check out the on-demand videos and downloadable content on this page. Scroll down and you should find it all there. So in the meantime, enjoy your day and we'll hopefully see you soon.